next market structure that we're going to look at is, of course, monopoly. And how would we characterize a monopoly? What all does that mean? Just one seller. So in this case, when we get to the graphing portion of it, we won't be doing the side-by-side graphs because the industry is the market and the only seller. What about their product? It is unique. That's the reason they are the only seller. We have various reasons why they might be the only ones in the market producing a particular product. But perfect competition, again, is one extreme version, and you can, if you want, write down or draw this little, it's not really a drawing, I guess, but this kind of giving us, again, a concept, an idea of what those four market structures are and sort of how they line up as far as their similarities and differences to each other. We talked about perfect competition. The other three market structures, monopoly, oligopoly, and monopolistic competition, those three can also be grouped together as imperfect competition. So imperfect competition refers to all three of those market structures versus the perfectly competitive model that we've been talking about. And we will see as we go through this, there will be some similarities that these three are going to have. Some ways that all three imperfect competitors will function similarly or make profit maximizing decisions, production decisions, pricing decisions the same way. There are some characteristics that they may share with perfect competition. So by the time we finish this and section 6, which will look at monopolistic competition and oligopoly, we'll be able to see what all those similarities and differences are. But all of these four are called imperfect because, as we're going to see, they won't be completely efficient. There will be inefficiency somewhere. Either it be not productively efficient, not allocatively efficient, perhaps both. Price being high, charging a higher price, not producing as much. Whereas perfect competition, which again is a theoretical fiction, we saw, perfect efficiency being both socially optimal and productively efficient, no missed transactions. That won't be the case with our imperfect models, okay? So, imperfectly competitive markets, this is true of all of those other three. This is true of oligopoly, this is true of monopoly, this is true of monopolistic competition. The reason that we have that is because mainly of high barriers to entry. Now, there are some of these market structures have higher barriers to entry than others. The one that kind of sticks out there is going to be monopolistic competition. They have the lowest barriers to entry of any of them. But many of them, particularly monopoly, which is what we're going to be focusing on here shortly, exist because of extremely high barriers to entry. They are the only firm producing in that market because there are various things that prevent other firms from being able to compete with them. For example, some of those high barriers to entry could be very high fixed or startup costs. It could be a situation where no one else can compete with that one firm because it would be so expensive and so difficult to get your foot in the door, so difficult and so expensive and so highly specialized and technical that you just wouldn't be able to do it. You would not be able to produce a product at a low enough price that anybody would want to buy it. Your competitor would be able to do it so much more cheaply. For example, this is one of the big reasons why, like a lot of utilities, like electricity and so forth, tend to be monopolies. I might want to start my own electricity company. I might even be able to look up online how you build all the machinery and all those different things to provide it. But as you can probably guess, the cost of that would be so great. There's no way I'd be able to, distribute electricity in people's homes at a much lower price or even a somewhat competitive price than Alabama Power does. So because of those high startup costs, it would be almost impossible for me to do that, even though it's not, nothing else is really stopping me. It's not like it's a huge secret, some of it is. But you see my point. Ownership of raw materials is another reason why we see another example of a high barrier to entry. We've used the example before of like De Beers diamonds. I might want to start selling diamonds, but it's going to be pretty darn hard for me to get my hands on those raw materials because they are so rare, so scarce, and so expensive. Think about something like, and this is not an American corporation, but something like OPEC, that controls oil. I might want to start my own oil refineries, but those are some raw materials that are going to be pretty darn difficult, if not impossible, for me, or even if I had a bunch of other people working with me, to get my hands on. So that's a high barrier to entry there. Some of them are legal barriers. Now, when we think about legal barriers, sometimes we might be thinking, well, aren't there legal barriers to monopolies existing, things that prevent them from existing? Yes, but there are also some legal barriers that actually can help monopolies to exist, mainly with things like patents and copyrights. What is a patent if you have a patent on something? So it's, like legal ownership of an invention. So you invent something or design something, you get a patent on it, that means you legally own it, meaning no one else could be profiting from it. And a patent doesn't mean you're going to get rich off of anything. It doesn't even mean the thing works or is going to be successful. But if you do happen to, develop some kind of a new technology or some kind of a new product or something, you get a patent on it, and that would prevent other companies from being able to profit off of that. Not to say they couldn't make something similar, but that oftentimes, because of what we sometimes hear about, proprietary technology, intellectual property, all those kind of things are usually legally protected, and at least for a while will prevent other firms from getting it on the market. Over time, that tends to not be quite the case. Because people will figure it out anyway, and develop their own ways of doing things. And patents and copyrights do expire after a while, so some of those won't be the same always. A copyright is similar, but what's a copyright more specifically? For written stuff, like for written word, music, that sort of thing. Copyrights on certain things. So that protects people's work so that people can profit off of it and it not be stolen from someone else or being used for profit. Now, imperfect competition, again, this is one that you probably are more familiar with in your day-to-day life. Perfect competition is sort of a theoretical fiction. Agricultural products and food products are probably our best example of that in real life. Imperfect competition, though, majority of the things that you buy, majority of the companies that you're familiar with, the majority of things that you use on a day-to-day basis probably come from one of the three imperfectly competitive markets. The car that you drive, that's oligopoly. The fast food restaurants that you like to frequent, Chick-fil-A and all the others, that's monopolistic competition. Most of your retail stores where you shop for your clothes and shoes and backpacks and all the other kind of things that you use. Cell phone, that's oligopoly, so forth and so on. And some things, even monopolies, whether that's public utilities or other kinds of things as well. Now, let's talk a little bit about imperfect competition as far as their price-making decisions. This is going to be true. Hello? Okay, thank you. For two of them. For one, it's not quite enough, but it's fine. There's one where there's more like 6 or 7, maybe 5 or 4 or 5, maybe. That's my second period. It's not a huge deal though. Most of them are phone. Well, the only time it really causes me a tiny headache is when we test, because Google Forms, the lockdown stuff doesn't work unless it's on a managed Chromebook. So I got like half of them doing it on the computer and half of them doing a hard copy, which is fine. It just is a little annoying. Yeah, that would be helpful. But yeah, get them out to everybody else. Get them out to whoever else needs them. And then, yeah. Let me go back and look. Yeah, let me look carefully. Because I got a lot of kids that have like their own laptop, which is fine for every day. But when it comes to the test, it's got to be on the school one of that lockdown stuff. Right. So it's really only even on testing that becomes an issue, because usually from their classwork, they're rolling up their own Well, my next one is Friday. Yes, that's what I was asking about when I was in there Friday. Was like, can I check out, 10 or 11 on my test day and then send it back? Okay. Okay, sounds good. Thanks, ma'am. So in perfect competition, we said that they were price takers, meaning that the market set the price and they had no choice but to accept that price. In imperfect competition, they are price makers. What does that mean? They set the price. For the case of monopoly, they are the industry, so they are the ones setting the price. But the same is going to be true for monopolistic competition because, so just keep that in mind. We're not on monopolistic competition yet, but we will see this exact same phenomenon happen with them. Because although their products are similar, they also have some unique characteristics, and so therefore they, they have more control over the price than perfect competition does. So here's where we can start to see a big difference between imperfectly competitive firms, mainly monopoly. We won't see this oligopolies. We do totally differently. So the same is true for them, but we just won't use the same kind of skills. This means that in order for the firm to sell an additional unit, they have to lower the price. Think about the demand curve, okay? Think about the demand curve for the market. It's sloping downward. As the price goes down, it's the law of demand, as price goes down, what happens to quantity demanded? It increases. So if the market price is $5, people are going to buy this much. They're going to buy, 10 units, whatever the demand schedule dictates. So if they want to sell more than that 10 units, they're going to have to change the price. It will have to be lowered. Their demand curve is going to be downward sloping. In perfect competition, we saw it was perfectly elastic. If they had no incentive to lower price, and they certainly didn't want to increase the price. So their demand and marginal revenue are all the same. But in imperfect competition, it's not. So because of the fact that they have to lower the price in order to sell an additional unit of the good, that means that marginal revenue is not the same at every level. It was for perfect competition, and we've gotten used to marginal revenue was the same as the price, and every time we sold another one, we got another $10, or whatever the price was. That will not be the case in imperfect competition. The marginal revenue will be different for every level of output because the price has to be different for every level of output. And this can be a little confusing to some people. It kind of takes a while for it to sink in of why that makes sense. But we're going to sort of go through it a little slowly here. I'm going to show you that worked out mathematically so you can see why that happens. So the big rule to remember for imperfectly competitive firms, this is true of monopoly and monopolistic competition. It's technically true of oligopoly, but we don't work with it that way. Marginal revenue is not equal to demand the way that it is in perfect competition. You don't have Mr. Dark in monopoly because the demand curve and the marginal revenue curve are going to be separate. They're going to be two different things because they are not the same at each level. So let's kind of work that out and see why that is. Because again, on the surface, you may be kind of confused by that. Why is the marginal revenue not the same as the price? If they sell a unit for $10, why isn't the marginal revenue $10? Well, it has to do with the fact that they have to change the price. They have to lower the price in order to sell that good at $10 and so forth, okay? So just kind of walk through this with me. You don't have to write anything down here. Let's just kind of take a look at this. What we're going to be filling in here, we're going to have a demand schedule for this particular product. This is an imperfect competition. And so we're going to figure out what the total revenue is and then what the marginal revenue is. Keep in mind what this would look like if it were perfect competition. For each quantity, it'd be the same price. You have a perfectly elastic demand curve, but that's not what we have here. So let's say you begin at a price at $11. At a price of $11, people don't want any, so there's no total revenue, and we don't worry about marginal revenue. Okay, at the next level, $10. Well, at $10, one of these units or whatever this is would be demanded. So that means that my total revenue is 10, and my marginal revenue is 10. So there it is the same. And we'll see that happen always when it first starts out. It will be the same. My marginal revenue is 10 because earlier it was nothing, now it is 10. Okay, now let's say that we go to the price of $9. So this is just a typical demand schedule showing you law of demand. As the price is going down, the quantity demanded is going up. So if we graphed it, we have a downward sloping demand curve. Okay, at $9, 2 will be demanded. So my total revenue, $9 times 2 units is how much? 18. So I have 18 in total revenue. But now let's look at marginal revenue. I had 10, now it's 18, so my marginal revenue is what? 8, not 9. All right, so that's how that happens. It's not 9, it's 8 because we go from the previous price, but at the previous price, a different number of units was sold. If this was perfect competition, the quantity demanded would be the same in each of those categories, which is why the marginal revenue is the same as the price. Okay, at $8, 3 will be sold. That gives me total revenue of $24. But that means marginal revenue is now 6 because I've gone from 18 to 24. So my price was 8, but my marginal revenue was 6. And we can keep going. At $7, 4 are demanded, meaning $28 in total revenue. Now my marginal revenue is 4. At 6, 5 are demanded, $30 in total revenue, marginal revenue of 2. It only went up by 2 that point. So the price went down by 1. My marginal revenue changed by 2. At $5, 6 will be sold. So there's a total revenue again of 30. Now my marginal revenue is 0. Okay, no additional revenue at that point. And watch what happens here. If we go to $4, now 7 will be demanded, $28 in total revenue. What's my marginal revenue? -2. It's actually negative at that point. At that point, the total revenue is actually falling now. So they're not even gaining any additional revenue. They're actually losing revenue on that point. So what's happening here is that, yes, they are selling more units, but they are selling them at a lower price, and therefore they're losing revenue on those previous units because it's not like they can say, okay, we're going to sell the third unit for $8, but the first and second one we're selling for 9 and 10. They're not doing that. They're selling all of them for $8. So there's a little bit of a loss of some revenue on those first and second units or however many you're talking about. So that's why we see that happen. So with monopoly, and again, this will also be true in monopolistic competition, they're not the same. And what do you notice about marginal revenue versus the price? What now? Okay, so it's decreasing faster, and it's also, they're lower to begin with, except for right there at the beginning. So it is beneath demand, and it tends to, get smaller faster, and eventually it even becomes negative. There is a point where it would become negative and total revenue is actually falling. So draw this. I do want you to draw this graph in your notes. Get very familiar with it because you're going to be drawing it a lot. This is what the graph for monopoly looks like. So we've got our usual things, price and quantity. We have a downward sloping demand curve. However, now we have a separate downward sloping marginal revenue curve. Notice that the demand and the marginal revenue curves started in the same place. They started together, but then they start to go apart. And you notice that the further down it goes, the further apart those two things tend to get. So it starts out kind of close, and then they start to separate even more. So for monopolies, the marginal revenue is less than the demand. Okay, so let's practice calculating those things and see what we we can get. So I want you to, we get there, never mind. So why does that happen? How come the demand and the marginal revenue are not the same? Why do they start out the same, and why is one beneath the other? So the reason why that happens, there's two kinds of effects that increasing production can have. One we call the price effect, one's called the quantity effect, all right? So increasing production, meaning we're going to produce more, we're going to try to sell more. Remember, they've got to lower their price in order to do that. In order to sell that next unit, they have to go to a lower price because according to the demand schedule, only this many are going to be demanded at this price. So if they want to change that, they've got to lower the price. Okay, one thing that can happen is what we call the quantity effect. When the quantity effect is dominating, that means that selling an additional unit of the good increases the total revenue. So yes, I had to sell it at a lower price, but because I sold more and the quantity went up, quantity effect, total revenue is actually increasing. Now remember, to sell that unit, they had to lower the price. So the price went down and the total revenue went up. So what does that mean about the demand curve at that point? Total revenue, Jeff. They had to lower the price in order to sell an additional unit, but the total revenue went up. It's elastic, okay? So the quantity effect will dominate in the elastic portion of the demand curve. So the part where it is elastic, remember demand curves have elastic portions, inelastic portions, and inelastic portions. When you're in the elastic portion, that's where the quantity effect is going to dominate because total revenue is going to keep going up, and that's where marginal revenue is going to be positive. Then there's also something called the price effect that could be happening because we have increased production. Once again, in order to sell that additional unit that I have produced by increasing my production, I had to lower the price. So now, yes, I'm selling more, but because I had to lower the price by this point by a certain amount or by so much, now my total revenue is actually falling. So that is the price effect. In other words, I had to lower price and total revenue decreased. So what does that mean about the demand curve right there? That's the inelastic portion of the demand curve. So that's going to be true, and the price effect is going to dominate when you're in the inelastic portion of the demand curve. Okay. Now, no firm is going to want to be selling and going to want to be producing at a point where their total revenue is decreasing. That just wouldn't make any sense. So monopolistic firms are typically, unless they're being regulated otherwise, they're going to be producing in that elastic portion. That's where they want to be. They always produce in that elastic portion of the demand curve where their total revenue is increasing as they decrease their price. They wouldn't want to be anywhere else. So the quantity effect and the price effect, they're always both happening, but it is a question of which one is dominating over the other. And in the elastic portion of the demand curve, the quantity effect is going to dominate. In the inelastic portion, the price effect will dominate. Okay, let's see if we can see that actually taking place. So let me show you that first. All right, so let's go ahead and draw. These are not hard to draw. These will be quick to draw. So go ahead and draw these out. This will help you see what I mean by that, the elastic and the inelastic range. And price effect and quantity effect. Okay, so what we've got here, this is what you drew just a moment ago. This is your firm. This is their demand and their marginal revenue curve. Okay, so demand is sloping downward. Marginal revenue, they start out in the same place, but then marginal revenue separates from it. It is beneath the demand, and notice that it even crosses over that x-axis. Now, you don't always have to draw it that way. Sometimes you might need to, but it's good to remember that it actually crosses over it, because if you think back to those numbers we were just looking at when we were doing that chart a little bit ago, what eventually started happening to that marginal revenue? It became negative. Okay, marginal revenue eventually becomes negative. Now, directly beneath that, these should line up. Okay, if you were to lay one on top of the other, that's essentially what you ought to be able to do with these. This is your total revenue curve. Okay, this is the total revenue curve for that firm, showing that as as price goes up, total revenue goes up to a certain point, and then eventually total revenue starts to go down. We talked about this concept with elasticity. Eventually, if I keep on raising my price, what will eventually happen as far as selling it and people buying it? Eventually, people will stop buying it because they won't want to pay that price. So eventually, as I raise my price, the quantity demanded is going to go down to a point where my total revenue is actually falling. Okay. Notice my total revenue hits its maximum. It peaks right where marginal revenue is where? Right where it's at zero. Okay. Because where my total revenue is maxing out, that means that my marginal revenue should be nothing. I've gotten as much total revenue as I can possibly get with this particular product, this particular firm's situation. And then after that, now my total revenue is doing what? My total revenue is falling, which means that my marginal revenue is negative. Okay, so marginal revenue is negative at that point. All right. So again, this is the same concept of the total revenue test that we talked about several weeks ago. If the price is falling and the total revenue is increasing, then the demand is elastic. So here, at this portion from 0 units to 8 units, at this portion of my production, that level of output, my total revenue is increasing. So that means that this portion of the demand curve that coincides with that, that's the elastic portion. All right, so all of that is the elastic portion of the demand curve. So if I'm looking at a total revenue curve, that should be the point to which total revenue maxes out. If I'm looking at just the demand and the marginal revenue, that will be to the point as long as MR is positive. As long as MR is positive, then you're in the elastic portion of the demand curve. Total revenue is climbing. But then, if we get to the point where price is going up, and the total revenue is going up with it. I'm sorry, I said that backwards. So the price is falling and the total revenue is falling. Now you're in the inelastic portion of the demand curve, which is all of this. That's the inelastic portion. Notice it's inelastic because now my total revenue is falling. So from 8 units onward, we're in the inelastic portion. Compare that to up here from 8 units onward. Now my marginal revenue is negative. And firms are always going to produce in that elastic portion. They're always going to produce in that elastic portion. It would not make sense for them to produce in the inelastic portion because their marginal revenue is negative, their total revenue is falling. They're not going to produce there unless they're regulated to do so, which we'll look at more in a little bit. But that'll bring up questions about, because sometimes you'll see things about if, why wouldn't the government regulate a monopoly to produce here? And the answer to that might be because that would put them in a place where their marginal revenue is falling, and they're not going to do that. They wouldn't be incentivized. They would just exit the industry altogether. Okay. All right. So they only produce in the elastic range, like I said. Okay. So let's talk about profit maximization. And then we're going to do a little practice with the marginal revenue that we were just talking about. Now, even though the demand marginal revenue situation is a little bit different in perfect competition, than it is in monopoly. Profit maximizing decisions are always the same. Doesn't matter if you're talking about a perfectly competitive firm or monopoly or also monopolistic competition, they are always going to produce where MR equals MC. Just remember that this time MR is not the same thing as demand. So they're still going to produce the level of output where the marginal revenue equals the marginal cost. Okay, however, for a monopoly, remember that marginal revenue is not the same thing as price. So that tells us the MR equals MC tells us for a monopoly the level of output. That just tells us the level of output. That doesn't tell us the price that they're going to charge. Because remember, MR is beneath demand. People are actually willing to pay more than that marginal cost to the producer. So they're going to charge not what it costs them. They're going to charge what people are willing to pay. What are people willing to pay for that level of output? So MR equals MC tells us the output level, but the demand is what is going to tell us what price they're actually going to charge. And then, as far as profit, cost, and all of that, it'll be the same thing that we do with perfect competition. We'll just put the cost curves on it, on the same things we were just looking at, demand and marginal revenue. We'll put the cost curves on there, and we'll read those pretty much the same way as far as being able to tell if they are making a profit, taking a loss, all that sort of thing. Okay, so let's take a look at what that looks like, how we figure out where MR equals MC using the graphs, and how we figure out price from there as well. Okay, so if we put those cost curves on top of what we just did, so go ahead and just jot this one down in your notes as well. So do your price and quantity, downward sloping demand curve, downward sloping MR curve that is beneath demand. And notice again, they started out kind of in the same place and it sort of opens up. And then put some cost curves on there. Average total cost and marginal cost. Okay, so what level of output should this monopoly produce? Why 7? Actually, looks more like 6. I know sometimes it's hard to see it, but why? That's where MR equals MC. They're going to produce where MR equals MC, which is right there at 6 units, actually. Okay, so MR equals MC at 6 units. However, that is a cost to the firm of looks like 5, but that's not what they're going to charge. Okay, because people are willing to pay for 6 units. We go up to demand. What are people willing to pay? 7. So what you do is MR equals MC, that's your level of output. Then you go straight up to the demand curve, and that's the price. All right, you go up to the demand curve to find the price because that's what people are willing to pay for that. The monopolist has no incentive to only charge $5 when people are willing to pay 7. So they're going to charge the 7. Okay, so knowing that now, let's calculate really quickly since we actually have numbers here, the total revenue, the total cost, and if there's a profit or a loss. So they're going to produce 6 units. They're going to charge $7 for those units. So what's their total revenue going to be? Be 42. So all that box represents their total revenue. Oops. Okay. Now, the cost at that particular level, 6, their cost is 6. All right, so what's their cost? 36. So are they making a profit here? Yes. Profit of 6. Okay. And that again, that looks the same. That really works the same as it did under perfect competition. The curves just look a little bit different. Okay. But we pretty much work that the same way. We can see that the price is above. So my price is right there, $7. If I wanted to draw it out, you could. That's above my average total cost, so I know already that they're making the profit. If my average total cost had been up, above that, they would not have been making a profit. Okay, so this is a profit situation. Okay, profit is $6. All right. So monopolist produces where MR equals MC, but they charge the price that consumers are willing to pay as the demand curve shows us. So you find that point where MR equals MC, and you go straight up to the demand curve, and that's the price they're actually going to charge. Okay. All right. Now, what if the costs are a little bit higher? In this case, all right, what is the profit maximizing level of output? 10, because that's where MR equals MC. Now, that costs the firm, looks like their cost is $7 per unit, or additional cost, additional cost per every additional unit is 7. It's not the total cost. But they're not going to charge 7. What are they going to charge? 9. They're going to charge 9. We go up to the demand curve. So straight up to the demand curve, they're going to charge 9. So what's the total revenue going to be? 90. The total cost looks like, well, that's not marginal cost. We got to look at average total cost. 80. Okay. So we're going to, and then, oh, I'm sorry, that's variable cost. My fault. That's variable cost. Total cost is up here. 100. Okay. So this is profit or a loss. This would be a loss. Okay, total revenue is 90. Your total cost was 100. The loss of $10 per unit. So this one, but even if we didn't have those numbers, we could still know that this is a loss situation because the ATC curve was above the price. Okay. All right. Let's take a look at this one. Calculate real quickly, just to yourself, and then we'll see if we got it right. Your total revenue, total cost, if there's a total profit or a loss, and then what it is per unit. Profit or loss. Okay, so what level of output are they going to produce? How many units? 5 units. Here's MR. Here's MC. So MR equals MC at 5 units. They're not going to charge $6 though. What are they going to charge? Price is going to be $10. Okay, so my total revenue is 50 because that is the $10 per unit times the 5 units that they're going to sell. What is their total cost? 25. How do I know that? ATC at 5 units is $5. So $5 times the 5 units, 25. So what's is it the profit or loss? Profit of 25. What's the profit or loss per unit? 5, because that's the 25 in total divided by the 5 units. Okay, so that's how that looks. Very good. All right, let's do one more for practice, and then I'm going to pass out the little practice packet that we'll look at. Okay, so same thing for this, total revenue, total cost, profit loss per unit. It's a little different, but don't let it throw you. So what level of output are they going to produce? Going to produce 6 because that's where MR equals MC. But they're not going to charge $6 for those 6 units. What are they going to charge? They're going to charge $9. They're going to charge what people are willing to pay. So what's their total revenue? 54, because that's $9 times the 6 units. What's their total cost? 36. How do we get that? Because this represents, in this case, this is representing both the marginal cost and the average total cost. So at 6 units, the average total cost as well as the marginal cost is 6. So 6 times 6, 36. That leaves us with a profit or loss. Profit of 18. That's the difference between them. And then the profit or the loss per unit would be 3, which is that 18 divided by 6. Now, as far as why you see it horizontal like this is something that you will see quite often. It is really just done for simplicity's sake more than anything else. It's not exactly a real life situation, so I would not worry yourself about why would that happen and how does that happen. But it's something sometimes done just for the sake of keeping things a little bit simpler. And just also keep in mind, sometimes you will see questions that say, assume marginal cost is constant, or assume marginal cost or average total cost or both are constant. And what that would mean is you draw it out in a straight or a horizontal line and just assume that it's the same at every level of output. Again, that's not really a real life kind of a thing. It is just something that is sometimes put in there just for the sake of simplifying stuff. So that's what that usually is meant for. Okay. All right. Oh, there's our boxes again. All right, so we'll get to that part of it later. We'll come back to the efficiency part. I want to do a little bit of practice first. So we're gonna hold up right there. I'm gonna pass out to you something you're gonna keep in your notebook. Let me get this stopped. Hold on.